the main problem. There you go, you all know that now, I didn't have to say that. But that's just to let you know that. So entrepreneurial and innovative thinking are creative processes. In fact, creativity is an essential element of it, and an essential attribute for successful enterprise and entrepreneurs. As far back as the 70s, economist George Shackle developed these frameworks on the nature of entrepreneurial process and on the idea that innovation cannot be focused on actual concrete knowledge of the future, but instead of one's imagination of it. The late Edward de Bono, or originator of lateral thinking, perhaps put it better in radical innovation rarely comes from people set in their ways, simply know more or have more information, but from those who manage to generate alternative perspectives. This relates to Shackle's sort of non-deterministic concept of what he called bounded uncertainty. And that's founded on the belief that innovation, or he actually calls it novelty, is an unpredictable process, chaotic and not determinable. Which sounds terrible, doesn't it? You can't actually put our finger on it, but it isn't some wishy-washy call to sort of daydream our way to successful innovation. There's a couple of academics, Brian Barnard and Derek Herbst, in their more recent research showed that entrepreneurial creativity and innovation actually requires semi-formal processes. It doesn't come from inspired flashes, but from sustained periods of thought, effort, and training. And this process can be thought of as having three main stages: imagination, creativity, and leading to innovation. And these, you may have read the book, The Originals by Adam Grant, and this sense of alternative perspectives and how to generate them is key to his thinking. And he points out that originality itself starts with creativity, and that originals are far more ordinary than generally thought, and aren't necessarily the extreme risk takers we think of as entrepreneurs. And perhaps combining these two things, we can say that Grant's originals are not especially or naturally creative either. And this is very much in line with the view of Abraham Maslow, who I'm sure you all know, heard of. And his quote says, "The key question isn't what fosters creativity, but why in God's name isn't everyone creative?" I think it's a good question, might not be to why do people create, but why do people not create or innovate? And he suggests that we abandon the sense of amazement in the face of creativity, as if it was a miracle. So in our session today, we'll be exploring the connection between creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, and discussing how, as founders and innovators, we generate ideas, capture them, process them, and develop them into successful products and ventures. So I'm Gary Pratt, I'm entrepreneur in residence at the University of Bath. This is all sort of interesting to me, partly because I'm currently researching and writing a book on creative entrepreneurship, and specifically the use of nature and the outdoors as a canvas to generate innovation. We're not touching on that much today, but the creative entrepreneurship is central to what we're talking about. I'm joined by my EIR colleague and an experienced business, innovation and new product development consultant, Sean. Peter 𝗬𝗲, the co-founder of insight and innovation agency Industry of Us, and with a background in innovation consulting, human-centered design. His interest is in bridging the gap between the science of how this creativity works with innovation practice in business. Also with us is Paul. Paul is VP of Technology at GKN Aerospace, has a portfolio of entrepreneurial startups, including 𝗏 that he was talking about. And he's a University of Bath MBA student studying how innovative ideas are captured and recorded. This is our panel. We're going to kick off with Peter and Paul, going to present some of their thoughts, insights and work, after which we'll have a Q&A. So please add questions to the chat as we go, and we'll try to get to as many as possible or pick up on the key themes. And following that, we'll open out the networking rooms, and you can join to chat to any of us about what comes up today or anything else. That's about it from me for now. So Peter, would you like to pick up from there?
Yeah, happy to. Great, thank you. I'll get my screen sharing going. Play with the technology. Great. Well, yeah, Hello, everybody. Yeah, my name is 𝗬𝗲 𝗬𝗀. I'm Director of Creative Practice at an agency called Industry of Us. I guess the theme that I particularly wanted to kind of share about in terms of our work is that one of the questions that kind of posed was at the centre of what Gary's just introduced, is this question about how do you stay creative and how do you stay innovative? And this really kind of fits well with part of our work around helping train innovators. I just wanted to start saying, who are we and what do we do? So we are a front-end insight, innovation and design consultancy. And we also support on the training for innovators. And many people may not have come across the world of innovation consulting, but essentially we help companies in the process of innovating, exploring new ideas in different ways. And that can be from... It can be from the process of wanting to understand users better, to uncover new needs, find insights into their products and their market, through to the process of generating new ideas and that very early stage kind of exploratory work, trying to make sense of what those new innovations.
Peter,
yeah.
Could I ask everyone else on to mute apart from Peter, because I think we're getting a bit of feedback somewhere.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, so yeah, my background, I spent the best part of the past sort of 20 years as an innovation consultant. And I think when we set up Industry of Us a few years ago, one of the shifts that we wanted to make was to move from not just thinking about the output, the end result of innovation, but actually to think about the innovators, to think about the journey that each of you as innovators or entrepreneurs have to go through. And that's, in many ways, that was our shift in focus, one of the big shifts in focus when we set up. One of my personal interests is around applying science and theory. So understanding where researchers around creativity have been able to kind of understand better the creative processes that we go through as individuals, how teams work best together to generate new ideas. And that kind of informs both our work and the work that we do when we can support training. So we talk about being here for innovators in the way that we like to work, and some of the clients along the bottom of that slide. So we work with the likes of IKEA, Dyson, Sony, and Unilever. So what's one of the problems that we think sits at the heart of this kind of creative challenge? And I think Gary, you mentioned a version of this, which I'm going to share a cartoon, which I think particularly brings to bear one of the things that I think is one of the biggest challenges that we face. Related to, I think, the 𝗬𝗲 𝗬𝗀 quote that you said, is that I think we all start off creative. Children have this innate ability to constantly explore, generate, and come up with new things. And I like this cartoon because it shows that evolves. We go through that evolution process of getting more sophisticated in how we are creative. But something happens, something in the teens potentially. And as we move into the professional world and our professional lives, our ability to express that seems to get challenged, to diminish, and we end up particularly like the end point of I'm sure everybody here has spent that time battling with PowerPoint to try and express some form of creativity there, and in some ways I feel that's a really the wrong expression of where we should be spending our time and how we're doing it. And in many ways, a lot of the work that we do, both in terms of our practice when we're kind of running projects, and in terms of the work we do supporting innovators with the training work we do, is kind of helping head back into the direction and try and unlock some of those tools and methods that actually came naturally to us in our younger days, but maybe kind of applying them in a much more kind of structured and organised way and applied to the challenges of innovation that we face today. So I just wanted to share a few principles that we touch on in various ways during both our projects and our training work that are really all about how this question of how do we stay innovative. So 5 principles to help stay innovative. So the first one that I wanted to share was around us as individuals, and this relates to some of the psychology research around it, and particularly around what's our attitude towards creativity and new ideas. And from a personality point of view, the personality factor most linked to creativity is openness. And it seems fairly kind of straightforward, it's quite understandable. But actually, in reality, it's one of the hardest things, I think, to kind of stay attuned to. It's something that we all have the ability to be open to new ideas. We know about that importance of staying curious. It's one of the things that features within brainstorming rules about the ability to defer judgment. But that's much harder in reality, and often as we go through creative processes, we might get stuck in various ways. We might get fixated on a particular idea or the solution that we have developed, particularly when you've invested a lot of time into that. And so one of the, I guess, the behavioral economics factors that can start to play is the sunk cost fallacy, where we invest lots of time into something and find it very difficult to step back from that. And so one thing that I know that entrepreneurs are often kind of told to think about is, are you in love with your problem or are you in love with your solution? And openness is very much about trying to make sure that you're focused on that problem side of things and keep on being open to exploring new possibilities rather than getting too fixed too early in that process. So my question for you guys is, how open do you feel you are to new ideas? When somebody suggests something new to you, is your first reaction to try and look to shoot it down or shut it down? Or are you open and wanting to see the potential there and see how that might benefit and might change your thinking? The second is around structure. And Gary, you touched on this. I've been fascinated by trying to work out, is there an ideal process for innovation for many, many years? And there's a few diagrams there on the right-hand side. I think particularly as the design community has got more and more involved in the innovation space, we've had a real kind of a boom in the number of different versions of diagrams for innovation and creative processes. And I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but I do find it a fascinating subject. But actually, for me, it's that there's value in having some form of structure. And the idea of structuring the innovation process goes back. Some of the earliest is Graham Wallace's preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification, which is his description of, in some ways, what happens naturally and organically as we solve problems. Obviously, that's been structured and moved forwards quite a lot over the last century. And things like design thinking and design sprints today kind of dominate some of the conversations around the structures that you might put in place. And we support that. We do think that it does have value. It doesn't necessarily need to be as rigid as some of the formal processes that might be kind of promoted. And we do believe that actually there should be flexibility. You don't need to put a 3-month program together for a small challenge, but for the big, difficult ones, that can be really, really beneficial. But one of the things that structure really helps with is often it can be hard to find the time to commit to the creative process. The conversation earlier on around emails that kind of can take over the day-to-day work. So actually having time for that, for allowing for creativity, giving it structure really helps that. It also helps keep things moving, so you don't get stuck maybe just at the idea stage before moving into working out what you're going to do with that. What are you going to build as a prototype of that idea, and how might you move that into learning about it? So again, I'm ending with a question on this one. So what is your creative process? Do you have a structure to how you approach your challenges? My third is around understanding your users. And for us, it's at the core of a lot of what we do, is applying user-centered kind of design research methods to understand users at different stages of that innovation journey. It can be very early on, where you're wanting to understand what are some of those unmet needs. It can be around, and I think one of the most exciting areas in terms of our work is around co-creating with your users. So not just seeing them as an input, but actually as a participant in that journey, and working with them and using their creativity to help inform what your solutions are. And of course, in some ways, the most popular way of trying to kind of gauge users is at the end of the process of evaluating, having ideas evaluated by them. They're all valuable, but actually the earlier you engage with them, often the biggest influence it can have on your process. So again, my question for you guys, as for those entrepreneurs that have joined us today, is how well do you understand your users, and how are you engaging with them to explore your new ideas and develop them? And then I wanted to come on to the idea of designing to learn. And so often we kind of focus on trying to generate our solutions and make them, get them to a finished state as quickly as possible. One of the things that we see a lot of value in is using that ability to create ideas early as a learning part of the process, not just as an output. So this is where the value of creating a phrase popularized by Google of prototypes, so very early stage kind of mock-ups of ideas that help you test aspects of it. They don't have to be fully finished. They can be very specific parts of your solution that you're wanting to test. But actually it's about getting your ideas shared very early, and being iterative has a huge amount of value. It is something which is core of the design thinking process. And some of the more, I guess, interesting and exciting aspects of that is the ability to create deliberate provocations. So one thing that we kind of sometimes apply on our projects is creating sacrificial concepts, things which are not deliberately the solution to the problem, but actually things which help us understand it better and create a conversation around them. So again, my question for you guys is, how are you testing and iterating your ideas? How are you improving them? And what are you potentially building or designing to learn from? And then my last one that I wanted to share was around the role of facilitating collaborations. And really, this is where we kind of move into that space around group creativity and the power that has today. But it does have its challenges. Getting together as groups is a much harder way to generate. Everybody's been in versions of both good and bad brainstorms, I'm sure, that are joining today. And so actually there's a real value in understanding how to really plan and run those creative sessions to get the most out of that creative group. And there's been lots of research into different types of brainstorming and looking at particularly about how effective it is under different structures. One of the interesting things that, in the research work, which goes back many years and has been repeated many times in recent years as well, is that under lots of conditions, actually just getting people together in a room to have ideas can actually be less effective than people working independently. So a quick win that we always recommend if you're not wanting to put lots of effort or structure in place is actually take the benefit of individual working, even in the group context. So something we call quiet storming, the value of, even when you've got groups together, doing something where you're getting independent input can actually really boost that starting point of creativity. That's not to say that we wouldn't recommend the dialogue and discussion that benefits afterwards, but actually allowing individuals, particularly maybe those slightly more reserved in the groups, to share and generate ideas early in the process can have huge value. And there's mention of the work of Adam Grant around originals being one of the pieces of literature out there that kind of explores the value of independent creatives. Another piece of work is around the value of diverse thinkers, particularly when thinking about facilitating collaborations. And something that we promote in our work is looking to bring together diverse perspectives on a challenge, and particularly when we're setting up some of our consulting work, we look to see how we can bring in different viewpoints. Many of our projects are global, and so we've actually set up a network of creative partners around the world that we will bring in to challenges, but we'll also look to find people specifically that relate to a challenge to bring in their perspective and involve them in that creative process. And of course, someday soon, hopefully we might be able to start getting back to doing some of those physical workshops, but actually there's a lot of value that can be had, particularly with reducing that geographic limitation of delivering some of these collaborations virtually as well. So those are my, I guess, starter prompts. And so my question on this one is, how are you collaborating creatively? Are you seeking out different perspectives, and how are you running your sessions to get the most out of the groups when you do get them together to work on your problems and challenges? So yeah, so my summary around how do you stay creative is, we are a consultancy and training business. So in terms of some of the stuff that we can support on, that may be of interest is we have courses around creative facilitation, as I've just kind of talked about some of the challenges there. We do stuff to help people understand how they might use the likes of design thinking, using user-centered design and that ability to work and understand users better. And we do stuff kind of incorporating some aspects of behavioral science and how that can help innovators on the journeys that they go on. So that's my short introduction, and hopefully a few provocations in there as well. So Gary, I'll hand back to you. So you're on mute, Gary.
You're still on mute, Gary.
Sorry. Oh, well, so I won't say that all again. I'll say thank you, Peter. I've got a lot of questions and I wish the format was different. We could dive straight in, but I think Paul coming on, it'll all come together and we'll have a great panel session. So I'm going to pass straight over to you then, Paul.
So, well, thank you, Peter and Gary, and the team for setting this up. I'm Paul Pereira. I'm an MBA student at the University of Bath. Somehow managed to squeeze in creating 3 businesses in the space of the year that I've been doing my full-time MBA. And the subject of my thesis that I'm working on is around entrepreneurial leadership in new venture creation and how do they manage serial innovation. So before I begin, if anyone hasn't had a chance, I'm going to ask that you do take my survey either now or towards the end of the session before you leave. But a bit about me. So actually my first startup, if you want to call it that, was in the aerospace industry 30 years ago nearly. I created the first big .com for aerospace called 𝗧𝗵𝗲, which was a combination of BAE, British Aerospace in those days, working with Rolls-Royce, Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon to create a business-to-business exchange. And subsequently, I guess I've kind of spent my life and career up until last year working in the likes of Airbus, GKN, BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce, and discovered that there was something really interesting about working within those companies, being a bit of an entrepreneur. And I came out of early part of March when the call to arms, I guess, last year was to build ventilators and created the ventilator challenge. So I had the fortunate opportunity to set up all the innovation and technology that delivered 14,000 ventilators in 14 weeks. And with that in my mind, I kind of switched tack a little bit and said, oh, how can I apply my technology thinking and create good in other environments? So one of my learning points in taking it from Peter's 5 points was to facilitate lots of collaborations, which has been part of my career so far. And my recent one was to create an accelerator program with Boeing and the Aerospace Technology Institute. And out of that came 20 companies, all startups that are doing relatively well in the pandemic. So that was a good thing. And then I said, well, how do I apply that now where there is the most urgent need? And I actually ended up forming a company called 𝗵𝗲, which leveraged all of the technology that came to my mind and all of those technology startups that I could bring together very quickly to solve the challenge that over 20% of NHS workers can't fit the mask that they've been given. So I've developed a business called 𝗵𝗲 with a couple of colleagues. And back to Peter's point, my diversity on my board, the creativity comes from actually a user who's an ICU nurse, who's one of my directors, bringing the problem to me. And I had a 3D printer, a 3D scanner. And we said, how could we make a mask that fits me? And that was the problem that we tried to solve. And here we are, nearly a year on, a couple of more grey hairs later, going through testing for our product, which is here in front of you, which really is a mobile app that scans your face, and then later on you get delivered a mask that fits you with a very, very secure fit, because it's your face and you'll be diverse, so you'll definitely have one that's different to everybody else's. And what goes from that is, how do you apply that learning into entrepreneurship? How do you take something in a corporate environment into an entrepreneurship and back again? And this whole idea is moving on with me thinking about the next big challenge we have of society beyond where we are today, which is, I think, the sustainability of our planet, really. And, we only hear today the Met Office is talking about raising temperatures, and we could be having 40-degree summers, which I don't look forward to, but I'm sure some do. But what I have been working in is 30 years of producing pollution in the aerospace industry. And over the last 10 years, I've been studying hydrogen. So I see that there's an opportunity to innovate inside large corporations and outside to bring solutions to bear. So why did I bring my thesis around this subject? Because I've been studying entrepreneurs and serial entrepreneurs and trying to work out what they have all in common. And it's not been easy. And actually, you know most of those faces, but most of them have got very, very similar points of similarity in that they've gone from one small company typically to a much larger one, to a much larger one again, and then they've built a portfolio. But actually, if you look at it, there are very few entrepreneurs that can do that successfully. And what do they have in common? And I quote from the most unlikely of those faces, 𝗂𝗏 who's actually down the bottom left, not the best of photos, but he was the founder of 𝗬𝗵𝗲 and now part of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 venture capital. He raised $750 million selling his 𝗬𝗏𝗲 business to Google, and since then has created about 30 companies. And he basically sets out that it's about people, products, and tools that allow you to continue to work in an innovation framework. And so with that in my mind, I was thinking, well, what do these people do in their daily lives? What do you do in your daily lives that keeps you entrepreneurial? Because once you become an entrepreneur, are you always an entrepreneur? Or back to Peter's point, do you stop listening to other voices and you only listen to your own? You could test some of those ideas out with some of those faces, but many of them have gone through their own journey and evolution without having ever written a book, Gary, or have ever thought about how they go about their entrepreneurial process. So I was trying to decide, how do I discover in my thesis what it is that makes entrepreneurs entrepreneurs, and what is the innovation process embedded in that? So I've studied over 116 articles. I can't name all of them, but I've just picked out a couple that you might find interesting. The first one is around the entrepreneurship process and the creation of that by 𝗵𝗲 𝗂𝗏. And I think it comes back to some of the architecture Peter's been talking about. Many of these papers actually say further research isn't needed to discover what variables or factors could link to the innovation process. That there isn't actually a link between innovation process and innovation performance, and that many of the ideas never actually go from the entrepreneur to delivering the benefit that they set out to. So I was trying to work out what the framework is that allows us to tackle that, from the prospecting of a great set of ideas and collaborating with many people to narrowing the funnel to then that last difficult bit of exploiting. So when I looked at this, then there was a very recent study which basically took a look at, and it's by Fontana from Indonesia actually, looked at the process of innovation into three parts. So we've talked about the innovation process in the middle a little bit with what Peter's been talking about. And I was trying to back connect it to what are the leadership styles, and hence my questionnaire, that connect in with that innovation process, from the idea generation to the idea selection to the idea development to the idea diffusion, but not leave it there. So what are the entrepreneurial leadership styles that then flip it from being a great idea and ticking all those boxes to actually performing on the right-hand side and actually creating that entrepreneurial venture? And so in this research I'm doing, I've begun to understand that there are really four aspects that we need to think about in terms of the likelihood of success of an entrepreneurial leader in achieving that entrepreneurial performance. And the first thing is that every one of those leaders that we've looked at does have a set of real moral compasses and purpose, and they drive themselves and their teams towards that. But what's more important than that is that they allow the people around them to take that idea and mold it to shape their own purpose and actually become more influenced by the people around them to change their purpose. And I give the example of that one with Steve Jobs. I mean, many people have read the book with Walter Isaacson. And he was basically cast as being this fairly dominative leader who didn't take people's ideas on board. But then Jonathan Ive came to his team, and basically he rolled over and let Jonathan Ive, the designer, the entrepreneur, creative, take forward the ball that was Steve Jobs's and let it go. And Steve Jobs, yes, he may have controlled a few things like the font size on a particular mobile device, but actually, in essence, he let the collaborative process take hold in his business whilst holding the common purpose and shaping that purpose and standing above the idea. And I think the point that you make, Peter, very well in the last presentation, I think it's Keith Robinson that talks about we train ourselves out of creativity. But actually what happened, I think in Apple's case, was people were trained into creativity. So I think there's a piece around allowing that leadership role to continue to pervade in the organization around a common purpose and stick to it. And my own experience of that comes from, when we set off with the ventilator challenge, on day one, there were 3 of us on a phone call. By the end of that first week, we had 700. By the end of the second week, we had 7,000. So how did we build that rapidly scaling, I'll call it venture because it was, of multiple companies? I think there were 40 in total by the time we got to the end of it that got involved in the supply chain and elsewhere. And it was because we had a common purpose, because we devolved that purpose and we devolved the responsibility for creativity. The second theme, which comes out of this, does come down to this idea selection. And I think it is good to take these kind of pauses. And I think you said sort of silent storming. We found in that ventilator challenge that one of the challenges was there were so many great ideas that taking all of them forward was just impossible. Okay, so we allowed things to bubble up. We didn't pop any bubbles, but some floated higher than others, and they were kind of self-selecting. And there was a bit of a process behind that, in that those that came up with the ideas continued to run with them until they ran out of steam. And even to this day, there are ventilator challenge offshoots that are still running, and some of those include the 𝗵𝗲 example. But what we realized was there was a whole range of other ideas that will continue to bubble up, even though they may not have made it at that time. So there's a bit about finding the time and the place and the space for idea selection that we believe is going to be key. In terms of the idea development, and this is the ingredient that I think comes down to, again, the leadership style, and we're going to test that, is where those ideas get built upon and encouraged along, and how they get mobilized. It's not just about putting money behind the idea. It's often about giving it the right attention. And many of the leaders that we've looked at through this process have said, if I spend more time with people down the organization from where I stand, I find many more reasons as to why I want to invest in those smaller ideas and bring them forward. So a lot of it is about attention to the detail within the organization, spending time nurturing it. In fact, in one of my organizations I work with, a billionaire now, basically said, look, the pyramid's the wrong way around in an organization. I might be the CEO and president, but I should be serving everyone above me. And I think that was an interesting one. And his characteristics were, and I'm talking to him about this research, that if you provide the environment and enable people on their ideas, you'll create multiple businesses off the back of that. And he can find now himself in a position with his billions to create, hundreds of other organizations and other businesses which will be equally successful. And his problem is he does have to filter these. And he has set out kind of challenges to himself as to why would he not yet invest in this particular business by using a gated process. So it comes back to, I think, Peter's point, that even in that creative process, you need some sort of measures of process gates, and limited to kind of very high level architecture. And we're looking at the framework in this study as to what those kinds of gates are. I'm not going to pre-describe those. But the other one, and the fourth point, is around this idea diffusion, because what might not be perfect for one organization could become a great starting point for others. And the example that I have, and I don't know Ruth, is on the phone from Birmingham University, where the team there provided me with the inspiration to continue with this idea of creating a mask to fit everybody. Their team had done some work at the university labs with actually a collaboration with King's College London, and they said, look, we are clearly not going to take this to industrial scale, but Paul, given your background, do you think you would like to take it further? And I think this idea of this collaboration and close-knit with universities is going to become super, super important as we begin to come out of this world that we've been in for the last 18 months. And this idea of diffusing knowledge from within academia and making it stick in terms of performing and creating entrepreneurial businesses is going to be a talent in its own right. And I think Peter's picked up on a couple of points there that you do need that collaboration to keep the creativity moving. And I think if anywhere in the world that we should be able to do this is in the UK, and if anywhere in the UK that we should be able to do this, and I'm being a bit parochial because I'm at Bath, Bath is a fantastic place with the burning platform around us to do something with digital, but also do something meaningful with life sciences and pharmacology all on our doorstep. We have a huge opportunity to really influence the global perspective in a very different way. So how do we really change the viewpoint of how academia integrates with industry and challenge ourselves to perform? So those are kind of the tenets of some of the research that I'm going through. And the final slide just captures some of my hypothesis, which we'll come back to as the survey ends. But the hypothesis is that there's a positive relationship between the entrepreneurial leadership and the innovation process. That means that good skills in entrepreneurial leadership, which will be relevant to creating the innovation and idea generation, may have a counter to continuing that to perform and create companies that are successful. So my hope is to be the disprove or prove that point by collecting and studying how people in entrepreneurial positions like yourselves sustain that innovation, create series of ventures or new value venture creation. And the hope is to derive some sort of framework that entrepreneurs and corporate innovators can leverage to improve their priorities and decisions about successful ideas and how to improve upon them. And I hope that gives you a sense of direction of some of the latest thinking. And what's interesting, there's of the 160 odd papers that I read, the one that I'm summarizing says that there's a lack of research in that framework, and the work that Gary is looking at writing a book around and I'm trying to study and research doesn't have much published material. So we're kind of in this territory of creating something that I think could be really valuable for the future. And I hope that you can join me by either clicking the link that I think is in the chat or capturing the QR code and taking the survey. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. If you can stop sharing your screen. So if you're like me, the rest of you, I've made quite a few notes or scribbles as I do, and quite a few questions. I think it's been fantastic to balance that sort of those presentations and discussion around the people part and the methodology part. I think that's the magic space, isn't it? Is the role that founders and leaders and that part plays, and the actual process part of it. And I think that's what we're all trying to unpick. So we're over to a panel event, but it's really just a group discussion. So I'm not quite sure on Zoom always the best way to handle it. Hands up is quite good if you want to speak and ask a question, and you can ask that of anyone, of Peter, of Paul, of me, of Sean, or anyone else in the room you like, or pose a question that anyone can respond to. If no one has one, I do have some, but if anyone wants to stick their hand in the air and kick us off, feel free to. I'll give a moment to see if anyone's hand shoots up. Oliver, you'll have to unmute, yeah.
Hello, everybody. So my question here is just defining the difference between innovation and invention, and if anyone sees a difference between those two words in relation to what we're talking about.
Peter, Sean, I think that's maybe your world?
Hi. Yeah, I think invention. Lots of entrepreneurs invent things, and it's you often hear people talk about ideas, and it's easy to generate ideas. The value, adding value, is the innovation piece. So my take on it, having worked with lots of entrepreneurs and corporate startups, SMEs, there's lots of inventions everywhere you look, and ideas. There's lots of intellectual property. Intellectual property as an invention isn't necessarily innovation. Innovation is actually when you add value, when you start to build the component parts that might sit around an idea or an invention, and turn that into potentially an enterprise that adds value.
Yeah, I'll just go second that. I think there's definitely a crossover between the two. For me, I think one of the things that the invention side does have is, I guess, slightly more biased towards having something protectable. So yeah, looking to develop something which has an IP element within it. I think innovation doesn't have to have that. So actually innovation can just be about combining some ideas that exist out there in the world. Developing a better user experience might not be predictable, but it can definitely deliver a better experience and therefore still sit as an innovation.
That's very much how we, one of the words we use in some of our programs we run at 𝗧𝗵𝗲, the word innovation is very much mirrors that. It's, the innovation definitely doesn't have to be invention. It can be, innovative ways of using component parts that are out there, even if that's digital services or innovative for your business process. Just changing how you do something can be innovation, even if you're not inventing something. But I think it's interesting that whole bit around innovation, corporate innovation, individual entrepreneurial intuition is all a really interesting space. Peter, I was going to ask you which sort of links to that, around the sort of user-centric part of innovation, and where that sort of individual intuition that you might put. The famous case is always Henry Ford, isn't it? If I asked the people what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses. What role or how do you balance that sort of what users say with someone's maybe natural intuition about their sort of innovation or entrepreneurial thoughts?
It's a good point. It's a quote that I really like, because actually I think it's actually misused a lot, because if at that period in time when you did that user research and you talked to people and they said that to you, it's still the right information. That is the information that we would get today if we were to ask that question, and it's actually how you interpret it that is where the value is. So if you think that the answer is that they are saying, I want you to make a faster horse, of course it's not going to be helpful. But actually, if what it's telling you is, I want to get somewhere faster, and that being the insight that you extract from it, and then you ask questions of either how do you get them faster, or why do they want to get there faster, actually your solutions will come from that understanding and exploration of that. So really it's about the conversation you would have with that person to understand, why are they asking for a faster horse, as being, it's that problem understanding. It's one of the spaces that I think is really one of the most fascinating parts of the innovation journey, is are you actually answering the right problem? There's one example, an analogous one I came across recently was the elevator challenge, which is somebody complaining about the elevator being too slow in a building. And so you could say, the answer is make a faster elevator. The solution that was proposed to that was actually to put a mirror by the waiting space, because actually the problem is that people's perception of time is longer when they're stood waiting for an elevator. So actually you just need to entertain them in that period of time. So actually what that leads to, particularly around kind of understanding users, is what is the real problem that they're facing, and can you really unpick it that takes you in a different direction? Can you get to a better version of the problem that takes you in a totally different direction?
Yeah, and I think that to just build on that, Peter, if I can, the ideas that have spun forward, if I call them that, and continue to land time and time again, seem to be ones that may not have been the first idea that the person that innovated came up with, and that the invention comes from something subsequently. And I give the example of what's sitting behind me. So Ruth from Birmingham here and the team there, came up with the idea of having a mask that would be fitting for all health workers, and that was good and that was great, but it wasn't actually easily patentable, and it wasn't easily an invention, back to your description and definition. But what became more relevant was the ability to take the code from the phone, the mobile app, and create a 3D surface, which then can be patented, and we've got a patent in process, to then turn that into another business opportunity. So the mask might be irrelevant, actually, as the outcome. The ability to turn something from a point cloud scan into a physical object, which can be printed for mass customization, could be the real innovation and invention.
I think that's great, Paul. And I was going to talk about that sort of, I guess it's related to sort of opportunity theory. The opportunity was there, but your actual long-term outcome may not be anything to do with that specific opportunity. And to your point, in terms of, I guess, more corporate innovation, I think Professor 𝗬𝗵𝗲 𝗜𝗍, University of Bath anyway. He talks about the sort of fences that are put up within organisations that limit innovation. I was taken by your point about the sort of gates you were talking about, and how do you actually build those? Do you think, is that all about that leader?
Yeah, it is. I'm going to say without question it is, because if you allow people to fail but help them learn from that failure, then you're going to create the safe space to innovate. The challenge, I think, is letting people fail, because we're, particularly in America, maybe in some parts of the world, failure is not a good thing. But actually, if we encourage failure, we're pushing the limits and boundaries. So I think that comes from a different perspective as a leader, because most leaders think that they have to always perform and always have to hit the nail on the head first time. But actually, the reality is innovation comes when you make mistakes as well. So I think if we're pushing the boundaries, we will find some failures, and we just have to allow for those. And I happen to believe that we're in this perfect storm. And I take my climate change example, and COVID actually have come together at a perfect time, if you want to look optimistically. Because I think what it's done is it's encouraged governments to step in and bridge the gap where research might have not been able to afford to do anything more to solve some of the challenges. Industry might have fallen flat on its face and said, well, I can't really tackle this right now, I'm dealing with a pandemic. But actually, let's take the aerospace industry as my preferable example. But we all know that we haven't traveled so much, and we're managing to get on with life somehow. And the carbon footprint of the countries around the world that have been, hit by the pandemic have dropped massively. Yet we're going back into the same situation as we were in 2019, even before we've finished 2021. So reality tells us that we haven't solved the carbon challenge that hits us in the face every day from now on until we hit our graves. And then the governments have started to step in with things like COP26 being a monocle of that. But we have the opportunity now to see money flowing where we weren't before. And I think that this is a really exciting moment, because we can embrace some of the things that were otherwise unexplorable. And I think we can fail in some of those as well, but also continue to keep traveling in the right direction. So I see that now, an example in hydrogen aviation, which was 10 years ago, I always thought would be completely loony in Rolls-Royce talking about it. Now, finally, 10 years on, they're starting to do something about it. So I think we hit this moment at an interesting time.
Maybe you're right, Paul. I think, those big paradigm shifting requirements that, climate change is the obvious one, well, they obviously require money, and, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 itself is, and I know you've been involved in, government grant type world, and it is a really interesting space for innovation, probably for a whole nother call, another program about that. Is there anyone else out there who wants to put their hand up? Daniel.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, panel, for the amazing contributions, really. Part of it is kind of following on from some of the things we touched on there, which is, there's so much of a language of innovation is sort of caught up with these incredibly beautiful sort of diagrams and processes and sort of organizational structures. And I use quite a few of those diagrams myself and have benefited from them, but it feels like it's not where the game is, and that the game is in this kind of almost this internal game which we have as sort of individuals, as organizations, which is about being able to truly listen, being able to reach out to other organizations or user groups in a completely different way to elicit new data and new insights. And, to also sort of challenge ourselves to be open to new ideas which are different to our worldview. And so I suppose there's a lot of things I see out there which are innovative, but actually true innovation is about a process of change to sort of both the approach, but also to sort of the individuals and the organization delivering it. And so actually to achieve true innovation is quite a, it's quite a special moment. And so I suppose my question to the panel is, which are the most opportune moments that they observe to support or sort of be part of or lead this process of change, in organizations? When have you got the best shot of making it happen? Whether it's about, producing a product that engages with users differently, whether it's about something as complex and challenging as climate change.
I could take a go, and then I'm sure others will follow. A really good question, Daniel. I think there's never a perfect time, but it's a messy process, innovation, to do it properly. And I think that you have to be somehow confident that you're allowed to make those mistakes and feel confident that you've got something underneath you if it didn't work. And I think that that's probably the safety net that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as long as you've got a roof over your head, can you take that risk? And with the pandemic, I think strangely, it's put a kind of question mark on what is safety around us. And so a lot more innovation has happened. I don't know if you've looked at the numbers of startup companies, and maybe it's because of furlough and other things, I don't know. But we've ended up seeing, I think, doubling of startup companies in the last year relative to 2019. I mean, I've created 2 in the last 2 weeks, and I probably won't stop. The idea of creating the right moment, I don't think could be better than it is now, to the first point. But I think it is a messy process, and not all of those that start will continue. And that's what we always know about, how many SMEs make the 5-year mark, because it's really hard in that period. My most successful has made 25 years so far, but and that's in the .com world, and taking that to today, it still exists. There aren't many companies in the .com world haven't changed ownership in that time. So I think taking that risk at any time is difficult, but taking it right now is probably better, if that answers the question. Yeah,
following on from that, Daniel, you asked us sort of personally, I guess from my point of view, and the starting point that Peter raised as well, is you have to be generating novel or wild ideas in the starting point, don't you? So that for me, it's that generation point. What you then do with it is, some of these other guys are hopefully solving of how you take those ideas. But I suspect all of us as founders, entrepreneurs, innovators, we've probably got the equivalent, I don't know how you capture things, whether it's a notebook or audio, we've probably got more ideas than we know what to do with generally, because, I think if you're that's pretty much somewhat a human trait, I think, if you spot ideas, but making them into something novel is really interesting bit. And then how do you choose, process, exploit them? I think that's where we are. But for me, it's that the bit which really interests me, and it backs up people like 𝗬𝗵 at Bath says, we're too focused on knowing before doing when we should be doing before knowing. And I find I don't quite know how to unravel it, but I like it.
I just actually picking up on that, Gary. My observation were 2 points really. One, from experience working with large organizations, and the challenge that a global international company has in innovating when they've got their cash cow, they're developing profit, they know what that they need to do. It is risky to say, right, we're going to spend a chunk of money over here on exploring the unknown. And sometimes they do it and they do it successfully, but there's a lot that it just pay lip service to this word innovation. And if it fails, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't hurt us. We've got our business generating profit over here. Well, that's different in a startup world. In a startup world, it's everything. you live and breathe it. And yes, you have an idea, and you've potentially even got funding, but it's everything you've got, so it's got to succeed. And I think, you know, you see it, certainly from my experience, when you meet entrepreneurs, you can almost sense the ones that are going to succeed and go a lot further, because they have that ultimate belief and passion. But actually, one other aspect which I think is interesting and is worth considering, you know, when you look at funders, angels, VCs, and large funds, you know, they do themselves focus on the solution, and they're investing in the solution, and you know, there's an importance on that converging thinking, when in fact the divergent thinking around the problem is something that, you know, we promote and is clearly important. So I think there's a tension there between that, you know, divergent and convergent approach. VCs and investors primarily, you know, when they're reviewing pitches, it's about the solution and the market opportunity and the size, when actually, you know, best practice and design thinking talks about, you know, spending more time in that divergent thinking space, and going back to Peter's point, you know, not falling in love too early with your solution, and really becoming intimate and more knowledgeable around the problem.
Yeah, I just jump in. It's a really good question. Actually, it's something which I've thought about quite a bit, and it's been partly why we, I guess, in terms of our focus as a consultancy business and training business, have focused on innovators, because actually it is the innovators within organisations, whether that's the entrepreneur within a large organisation, whether it's the entrepreneur leading their business. It is, you know, they are the ones who kind of drive that idea through and make it happen. And I think that's where the, you know, that openness point that I kind of started with is so important, around that need to be open to new ideas themselves, whether that's them generating, or whether they're listening to their teams or their teams that they've set up to help them with their innovation process. And really, in terms of the work that we've done, the most successful stuff does happen where it is that innovation leadership, coming back to kind of Paul's point, where have they set up the right culture for innovation? Have they set up the spaces for the failing? Or, you know, you can look at it as failing, or it's just about that learning process, ultimately that continuous innovation. Where does it come from? That's the hard part, because there isn't a magic bullet in terms of when is the right suite of things going to happen, in terms of both what's being developed and the opportunity. Is there going to be something which changes the business context, which means that is the right time for the idea? And I feel that often it's about getting that combination of the right team working on it, the right technologies and things which enable it, and that right kind of environment for the idea. And often one of the challenges is that entrepreneurs might get to the idea too early, and it just takes time before the environment becomes right for it.
And just put an example to that, Peter. So I've been talking to VCs who probably about 4 weeks ago probably said, why are you bothering making masks any longer? Because we're not going to need them. And then, you know, we only need a little rise in the US numbers of people having to now self-isolate or whatever, and the mask mandates come back in the US. And so people kind of take the latest bit of news and they apply that to what they're thinking about that day. And so something is about timing, everything about that in some respects. But I think the other thing is the entrepreneur's mindset is there's still a problem to be solved. And the market might have fluctuated by a teeny bit, but it's still not solved, that problem. So I guess one of the things that I would say is that makes someone successful is to continue with the vision and pursue it to the point, still listening, but don't be deflected by the latest bit of advice you've been given. If you've got that better understanding, and probably you've absorbed that detail of all sorts of other aspects that others haven't thought about, keep that passion, keep that belief, and keep that willingness of your team to continue. And in my case, you know, having a ICU nurse who's got a young baby and has to go back into work shortly, that's keeping us motivated to get her the mask that we set out to do last year and get it tested.
Thanks, Paul. Peter, can I just going back to and linking up to what you said about, I loved your picture of what breaks in our playful sort of, education. And maybe, we won't get into the failings of maybe the education system or curriculum, but in terms of a company's environment for teaching and learning, you talked about getting the environment right. I guess this is a hypothesis. Are companies taking on that school sort of education system, teaching and learning that we end up in at the end of school or maybe university even, and is that broken or wrong in terms of that play and openness that you talk about? Should they sort of throw that out and start afresh with something different?
Oh, yeah, good question. In terms of how do organisations run their business, that's a big kind of wide open question. Yeah. I think one of the aspects, I guess, where you see some of the success, and it comes back to one of the points that Paul made around the role of autonomy. And I think that one of the things that really, again, there's been lots of kind of scientific research around this and creativity, which is where you give people autonomy, they are more creative. And so actually where you can give people space and time in their roles to have that ability. And so that's where I think it was 3M was the first to do this in the 20s or 30s, where they introduced 15% time, where teams within the R&D department were allowed to spend time on projects of their interest and passion. Google more recently have taken that on board, and other companies have that too, where you allow some element of autonomy within people's roles to pursue projects of passion. And arguably, a lot of the innovations that have come out of Google have started as those small passion projects within those teams.
It's interesting. A company I used to run, we had a Google executive as an investor, and I asked him once, it's the 70-20-10, I think, isn't it, Google? And I said, what do you do with your the time you can do anything you like? And he said, I go home early on a Friday. And he was quite a senior executive. It sort of shocked me for a while, but actually, if you then translate that into thinking time, well-being, doing something, maybe even that's powerful, even if he wasn't sat at his desk working on a new project. So interesting. We've got a few more minutes before we'll go into our breakout rooms. So does anyone else have a comment, question out there, want to stick their hand up? Helen.
Hi, just wanted to say thanks for hosting the event, and also to the panel for some great contributions and discussion so far. I think my question to the panel is around what Paul mentioned in terms of process gates in innovation, and whether it's actually gatekeepers who limit the progress of innovation and the diffusion of it. So from your early adopters or latecomers to innovation and users of a new product or service, or financial stakeholders, and ultimately for startups, the investors.
I can start, Helen, that's a really good question. So gatekeepers exist in various ways. Even a good entrepreneur themselves can be the gatekeeper to the idea progressing. And I suppose that the question is all about risk management to some degree, and opportunity management is the other flip to that, which I think we sometimes forget as business people. There are the two sides to the coin, and I think we put more emphasis on the risk rather than the opportunity in our culture, certainly in the UK. I'm not sure it's the same elsewhere in the world, because I'm actually Sam here is from the MBA. And out in East Asia, there's a lot more entrepreneurial kind of thinking that is happening, as I can see it, and they continue to take more risks than we may be able to do, because they see the opportunity the other side of it. And maybe the barriers to progressing an idea are lower because people just have a different attitude to taking that kind of risk. In terms of, and I'm being very unkind in some respects, but the cost of life in some countries is a lot lower, so people take higher risks. And therefore their culture becomes more risk resilient and more opportunistic. And so I think, it is a cultural aspect, but you can train that, and I'm sure Peter does, out of companies to take a little bit more risk, because it's quite likely that there's a couple of big voices in a board that are probably the ones that are least likely to want to take the next step at a gate. And you need to be able to tune those down a little bit to play up the others. I don't know, Peter, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting challenge. I think that, you know, one side is designing great solutions for your users, but actually before you can get there, you have this series of gatekeepers, whether that's within the organisation, whether that's getting investors on board to support you to fund the development, etc. And actually recognising that they're different is really important. So actually there is a separate innovation challenge, which is how do you design your communication, your pitch, what are the aspects which will engage that as an audience, that gatekeeper? How do you communicate, you know, how do you design it so that you maybe reduce the risk perception of it, so that when you're pitching it there, that is a different pitch from when it's to the user. And the same is true actually when you're working in cross-collaborative teams. Everybody has a different perspective on the same idea as to where the true value is, what's going to be important in terms of the development, where the priority is in terms of how you're doing that product, you know, that product or idea development, which aspects require the budget and time to make them strong. So that balance of seeing different audiences and trying to, you know, see those as part, you know, sub problems within your innovation challenge is an important thing. And that's where some of the behavioral science stuff actually is really useful around kind of deploying things which helps you know, utilize the way in which we naturally respond. So, you know, Paul, your point around the fact that we respond based on what's going on today. So people saying, oh, that master thing, we've moved on from that high demand point of last year. Actually, it's about reframing that and actually how do you pitch and communicate the present need under the context which they understand to help kind of re-engage in that way.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for the question, Helen. I think it's time we broke into some breakout rooms, so you can follow up if you want to with any of us and have a bit more informal discussion. So thanks. Before I do that, I hope you found it useful. I think it's been a really engaging, some really engaging discussions and questions, and one probably we could carry on for a long time, or have lots more sessions, you know, off the back of. You know, I've already said that I think that, you know, innovation definitely requires, you know, that openness and play that Peter talked about, and we need to break down potentially some of the formal structures or processes, and it can't be about sort of pure sort of reasoning. And, you know, how we solve that, who knows? But, you know, we've got some ideas to take away and some more discussions to have. Before I do go, I just want to say thank you to Peter, Paul, Sean, and everyone who's joined us, in case you leave us or I don't see you again, because you can leave the breakouts when you're ready. This session has been part of the University of Bath's Business Acceleration Hub program that Sean and I are EIRs on. That's an ERDF funded support program for early stage companies. And as part of the broader 𝗧² support, some of you will have taken advantage of that. We have a virtual membership program called 𝗬𝗵𝗲, which offers ongoing support to early stage companies and links in potentially to our scale up program for companies moving towards larger investment. And the innovation hubs that this is part of are actually drawing to a close this autumn. Probably not a surprise that there won't be much more ERDF money coming to our way, but I'm sure our other programs will continue. I won't call it the last gasp, but one of the final bits we're running as part of that is we have a number of micro grants, £1,000 micro grants to give away to innovative companies to help you somewhere on your journey. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's very flexible in how it can be used. You have to be eligible or on one of our bars, but you can talk to Sean and I about that. If you've got a small challenge that you think that we can help with the micro grants, please come and talk to us, and we'll send out some details about that afterwards by email. And also talk to Sean and I if you're interested in general 𝗧² membership or how 𝗧² can help you. I'm going to pass over to Sean briefly to talk about a specific challenge that we're running at the moment, and following that, Jane will set up some breakout rooms, and hopefully we'll all see you in one of those and not be sitting there on our own. But thank you again, and over to Sean.
Hi, just a brief note to say that if you're a business, particularly in the cybersecurity space, or if you're a business generally where you're managing lots of data, 𝗧² Bath, we're supporting a project in September to assist startup businesses, SMEs, with cybersecurity challenges. So if that's a particular hot topic currently for you, and you're faced with challenges around cybersecurity, I can provide you with some more information how we can help you with that. So I've just dropped my email into the chat. Please connect with me if that's of interest. Over to you, Gary.
Thanks, Sean. Well, I think we're going to have some rooms to pop it out. Jane, I assume people can move around them. Is that how it will work, or when they're in one, are they stuck? I don't know.
Yeah, they'll allocate automatically, but if someone wants to move, then they can come back to me, and I in the main room, and I can populate them, pop them back into the different.
Oh, so you'll just randomly arrive somewhere, but if you don't like where you are, we won't be offended. If you want to go and talk to someone specifically, bounce back, and Jane can put you in the room you want to be in. Thanks all.